I'm continually struck by how few Americans are familiar with the rich roots of Iraq's indigenous Christian community. With the exception of Israel, the Bible contains more references to the cities, regions, and nations of ancient Iraq than any other country. The patriarch Abraham and Isaac's wife Rebecca both came from cities in Iraq. The events of the book of Esther for such a time like this took place in Iraq, as did the account of Daniel in the lion's den. Today, many of the Christians of Iraq still speak Aramaic, the language of Jesus. In Egypt, some 2,000 years ago, Mary, Joseph, and Jesus sought refuge in the land from the murderous aims of King Herod. Egypt's Coptic community traces its origins to the Apostle Mark. The Syrian Christian community, too, has ancient roots dating back to the 1st century. We read in the Bible about Paul on the road to Damascus. Christianity, like many other now small religious communities, is indigenous to this region. For centuries, it has been part of the rich tapestry that is the Middle East. Tragically, in the countries I just highlighted, these defenseless religious communities are now facing existential crisis, which threatens their very survival in the lands they've inhabited for centuries. I regularly meet with beleaguered Christians from this part of the world. Their stories are eerily similar. Believers kidnapped for ransom, churches, some full of worshipers attacked, clergy targeted for killing, some kidnapped. And in the face of this violence, Christians are leaving in droves. The resounding theme that emerges is quite simply a plea for solidarity, an appeal for help. Where is the West? They wonder. Well, today, I'm heartened to say that these cries have been heard. We are gathered to release a pledge of solidarity and a call to action on behalf of Christians and other small religious communities in Egypt, Iraq, and Syria. The group of signatories represents a diversity of American Christianity, with individuals hailing not only from Catholic, Protestant, and Orthodox traditions, but also a variety of sectors, thought leaders, clergy, parachurch heads, university and seminary presidents, and the like. Having served in elective office for more than 3 decades, I'm increasingly convinced that the discussion, or the lack thereof, among government leaders and opinion makers on this issue of religious persecution is simply a downstream manifestation of what is happening in the broader culture, and specifically in the faith community domestically. On these issues, Washington is largely downstream from the proverbial pulpit. My colleague and good friend, Democrat Rep. Anna Eshoo, who has worked with me for all these years on this, and I have for more than 3 years been pushing for legislation that would create a high-level special envoy position in the State Department charged with focusing on these very issues. For 2 consecutive Congresses, this legislation has overwhelmingly bipartisan passed the House only to languish in the Senate. We are all too aware of the limits of purely legislative remedies to these complex and increasingly urgent problems. The faith leaders assembled and those who have signed the pledge have made clear they are not waiting for Washington to take action. They recognize that unless the American church begins to champion this cause, the foreign policy establishment will hardly lead the way. They are committing to be their brothers' keepers, whether in Nineveh, Cairo, or Almas. And for that, I thank them. I would now like to recognize the Rep. Anna Eshoo, who has worked tirelessly on this issue. Anna?
Thank you. Thank you very much, my dear friend and a man of enormous integrity and a man of real conscience, Frank Wolf. You know that he announced that he is retiring from the Congress, and with that announcement, my heart sank because I don't know anyone in all the years, and this is my 22nd year in the Congress, that has brought the conscience and the integrity on human rights, on the issues that we're here for today, as Congressman Frank Wolf has. And I really think, Frank, that only God can really bless you and will continue to for what you have done. You should be richly rewarded for your character, your integrity, and your work. I want to acknowledge all of the religious leaders that are here today. You really grace the Capitol with your presence, how important it is, how hopeful it is that you are here in solidarity with one another. To all of the organizations, certainly the Hudson Institute, so many that have come together and been with us in discussions and trying to pull something together that addresses what we have witnessed over the last decade, which is an accelerated number of assaults on Christians in the Middle East, particularly in, as we know, in Iraq, in Egypt, and in Syria. Just last month, the rebel attack in the northern Syrian town of Qassab placed the once tranquil town's 2,500 Christians, their residents there, on the chessboard of international politics. I mean, just think of that. People living next door to others. This is their life. This is their community. This is the only thing that they've ever known. And it really has revived the dark memories of the Armenian genocide. Across all of these countries and in the communities where the assaults have taken place, we know that they are attacked, assaulted, killed, kidnapped because they are Christians. This is what is the unifying issue. Why? Because they are a small minority. They have no one to protect them. Christians do not have an army. They have no security, and they are not as valued as they should be, and they are smaller groups, so they're much easier to go after. And of course, we know the dark pages of history. My family knows them very well from both sides of my ethnic background, Armenian on one side and Assyrian on the other. Not Syrian, but Assyrian. Yeah. And I do speak the language that Congressman Wolf spoke of, today's manifestation of Aramaic. And so these are the original Christians of the world, the original Christians. And why the Western world has not had a deeper, broader appreciation of this has really mystified us, troubled us. But you're coming together and signing this pledge of action to call. We are called by all of our faiths to take action on the issues of faith and how they manifest our values in the world. This is not unique to the Congress. This is as old as our faith and what our faith calls us to do. So the importance of this effort, and it was Congressman Wolf that came up with the idea that we needed a very high-ranking official within our national government, a special envoy, an ambassador status that would be solely dedicated to the Christian minorities, especially in these troubled parts of the world. Why did he come up with that idea? It was only because we met and kept meeting with both the Republican and Democratic administrations, with the State Department, and they paid no heed to us. There were some that tried, some that moved the ball maybe a few inches forward, but for the most part, there wasn't any collective responsibility taken. We as Americans, or hyphenated Americans, understand the value of faith. We understand that this is something that our framers set forward in the Constitution, and so it's a value that we hold, and it's a value that we need to export as well. And so for those priests that have been murdered, those bishops that have been kidnapped, the silence that surrounds it, the lack of action, and the force of the power of the most powerful nation on the face of the earth is absolutely essential. And for those that are subjected to this, they need to know that America and its faith community are standing with them. So I can't thank you enough for your presence, because your presence says everything. It is the most eloquent statement that you have climbed this hill to help us climb another hill, and to eventually, God willing, that the Senate will take action on this, and that when Congressman Wolf retires, that he will look over his shoulder and know that this noble effort, is that action was taken on it. But make no mistake, your presence, your call to action, your signing the pledge solidifies this effort and brings something to it that no one else can bring to it. And that is the extraordinary respect that people across this country have for spiritual leaders of our nation. So God bless you, and thank you. Thank you to the nonprofits that do such the work of conscience, and to my friend and colleague, the magnificent Congressman Frank Wolf. Thank you.
I'm Leith Anderson, the president of the National Association of Evangelicals. When something awful happens that has never happened before in 2,000 years of history, we need to know about it, and we need to do something about it. And so Christians started in the Middle East and have flourished there for 20 centuries. And today, countries including Syria, Iraq, and Egypt are becoming the unsafest place in the world for Christians. So we believe that religious freedom is more than a government-given right. It is a God-given right, and those who claim to believe in God should be the strongest proponents for religious freedom for everyone. The targeting of religious minorities in the Middle East is heartbreaking, and we should respond with a mix of tears and of anger over what is happening. There are numerous religious minorities, but Christians are the #1 target. All Christians, whether wearing a cross or going to church or having Christian on your ID, leads to unspeakable persecution, lost jobs and forced conversions, expulsion and murder. And what we are seeing here is ecumenical cleansing. It's an ecumenical cleansing. That is, forcing people who are Christians by whatever label out of countries where their roots are from the beginning. So we know that when an airplane disappears with hundreds of people on it, or a tsunami strikes, that the attention of the world quickly goes there. And at the same time, too few know about this ecumenical cleansing of hundreds of thousands and millions. So the question is, what should we do? And with this pledge of solidarity, we call on American Christians and churches to pray and to act. So our pledge of solidarity asks for review of foreign aid, appointment of a special envoy, and the engagement of governments around the world. It is not just our American government, but the extent to which we can engage governments around the globe who are dealing with and have business relationships. It makes all the difference. So we're going toward a general election. Here is a simple suggestion that Christians in churches across America ask a question of every candidate of every party for every post in the Congress. And that simple question is, what is your perspective and what are you going to do about the persecution of Christians in Syria, Iraq, and Egypt? That we keep praying to God, and that we keep asking our government to help our persecuted brothers and sisters. Thank you.
One of the readings for today just happens to be the reading for liturgy taken from the New Testament for every Catholic priest celebrating Mass anywhere in the world. Begins with the reminder that the Church, that Christians early on suffered persecution, suffered violence. This is not something new in the history of living out our faith. History makes it clear that at various times people of faith have suffered. But what we're lifting up today for you to help make visible throughout our country and our world is the intensity of this new continuous action of violence directed at Christian minorities. Our Holy Father, Pope Francis, and our own United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, as well as numerous individual bishops, have been active in the effort, in collaboration with religious leaders representing a range of religious faith communities, to bring the issue of violence against vulnerable people, especially our fellow Christians, to bring this to light here in the United States. And it's a pleasure for me to be here today, simply to associate myself personally with this wonderful, wonderful effort here in this room and elsewhere among Christian leaders to lift up our brothers and sisters who are suffering so much and who are facing an exclusion from their own homes. I've often asked, how is it that things like this can happen? How is it that there can be concentrated, continuous, persistent acts of violence directed against groups of people? In this case, specifically against Christian minorities. How is it that that can happen? And I think the answer keeps coming up. It happens because of the silence around it. It takes place because so many others are simply silent. If history has any lesson to teach us about silence, it's not a good one. So often people suffer, in this case, forced from their ancestral homes, simply because everyone else has remained silent. And this morning, why we're gathered here, this is not an advocacy for any partisan political plan or policy. Rather, we're simply trying to break that silence. And everyone in this room is invited into that action so that vulnerable people will find there's support for the voice that says, we respect these people, they need to be respected. There's a monitoring of their situation underway, that there are already processes whereby whatever happens is lifted up for everyone to see. This is a very important moment. We have an opportunity, all of us here in this room, to break the silence. It falls to all of us to be true to our heritage, our American heritage. It's a wonderful tradition in our nation to be respectful, to be tolerant, to see around us a pluralism of cultures that enrich this great nation. And we need to do all that we can do to see that that is one of the things that we export. Tolerance, the recognition of the rights of everyone, and the respect for everyone. And thank you for helping to make these concerns known. And today, we have this wonderful coalition of such respected people here from religious traditions across our country, all saying the same thing. We need to speak up. And those who represent us need to take the steps that are necessary to see that the great American value of tolerance, of respect, of freedom, of religious freedom and respect is something that everyone sees, not only in the way we speak, but in the way we act. Then in concluding, I just want to say a thank you to three Catholic agencies who are responding with humanitarian aid on the ground as we try here to be heard at another level. I want to thank Catholic Relief Services, the Catholic Near East Welfare Association, and the Aid to the Church in Need organizations. All three of them are doing for people what needs to be done as those people wait to hear from us that our voice speaks to the world for them. Thank you and God bless you.
Your Eminence, Your Grace, Reverend Fathers, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Christian and Arab Middle Eastern churches together, first of all I want to thank and applaud Congresswoman Anna Eshu and Congressman Frank Wolf for bringing us together in our nation's capital city to concentrate our thoughts about the current condition of Christians in the Middle East and to explore ways we can help. It is a well-known fact that the Middle East is the birthplace of Christianity. What is perhaps not as well known is the fact that Christian communities have been living and practicing their religion in the Middle East for the past 2,000 years. We, the member churches of the Christian and Arab Middle Eastern churches together, represent our mother churches that are based in the Middle East. During the past few years, these churches and their faithful have been facing increasing discrimination, hardship, and persecution. It is not an exaggeration to state that today Christians in the Middle East are experiencing one of the darkest days since the persecutions during the early years of Christianity. This reminds us the exploitation of religion by the Ottoman Empire. In the beginning of last century, they wiped out the entire Christian communities from modern Turkey, Armenians, Assyrians, Greeks. This was the beginning of forced deportation and the genocide. The presence of Christianity in the Middle East is a deep-rooted reality. For 14 years and 14 centuries, Christians have coexisted and cohabited with the Muslim Arab people, who always regarded the Christian people as an indigenous people of the book. They encouraged and sometimes they protected the Christians' presence and rights. Today, unfortunately, we are witnesses to an assault on Christianity in the very area where the radiance of Christian light first shone. We are grateful to the Western countries for their humanitarian aid. However, we are deeply concerned that most Western countries have been silent about the plight of Christians, in spite of several bipartisan and respected research centers that have named Christianity as the most widely persecuted religion in the world that is facing now extinction in the Middle East. The Christian leadership in the Middle East stands firm in its determination to maintain the Christian presence in the Middle East and to help the people remain in their countries they consider their home and the place they belong. Thank you.
I'm Jim Liskey from Prison Fellowship Ministries, which includes Justice Fellowship and the Chuck Colson Center for Christian Worldview. Congresswoman and Congressman, thank you for doing this. I too want to thank the members of the media for being here and encourage you to exercise your calling. It is true that you become, in many ways, the voice of the martyrs and the voice of the minority. Congressman Wolf asked me to come and channel my best Chuck Colson. And so in asking, what do we need to hear today, I believe we do need to understand the why behind the what. Why should the churches in the West, and why should everyone in the West be concerned about what's happening to minorities in the East? Because everyone on planet Earth is created in the image of God, there is intrinsic value in every individual. People cannot be commodified, they cannot be sectarianized, they cannot be politicized. It is a basic human principle that, especially when minorities are being affected by a majority, it is imperative, if we will remain human, let alone Christian, that we are concerned about these individuals. I think there's also an interesting second element here that we would gain from the teaching of Jesus and the radical teaching to love our enemy. That even in the case of those who are perpetrating the violence, it is not a stretch as we look across history and see that many times leaders engage those who are innocent to participate in the violence, and then we have to deal with the aftermath of those who have been drawn into a vortex of violence, who participate in it not as much for their own calling as they do for their own survival. Even the enemies that we see, friends, find their souls in jeopardy. It is imperative for the Christian church to rise up. I was a pastor for 25 years. I understand that struggle in the pulpit. But this is one thing that we should not struggle over. It is at the beginning of our Christian scriptures that we see that God created man and woman in His image. The stretching of that story as we dig into it in the language really is best said that they created us in their image. Father, Son, Holy Spirit created us to be in community. Friends, our geographical location on the globe does not define whether or not we are in community. Being created in God's image dictates that we are in community with those in every part of this earth. By signing this, by all of us coming together, by coming across really what sometimes would see barriers, but now we're saying these are bridges. This is a bridge for the Christian church to come together. I believe Chuck would remind us that it is in fact the cult that defines the culture. It is the activity of the church that will move the nation. And if our churches across the country will make the struggle of a few, actually, by definition, of the image of God in all of us being the struggle of all of us, we can make a difference together as those created with that spark of the divine in us. We can make this difference. Members of the media, please tell this story. Tell the story of children afraid to walk the streets because of the church they attended on the Sabbath. Tell the story of the injustice, because they are no different than us at the core of our being. The image of God exists in them and in us. Thank you.
I walked into church the other day and my young people said to me, I love my young people. They're all Iraqi, they're Ashuri, Chaldean, Syrian Orthodox, Chaldean, Latin. It doesn't matter, we're one thing, we are Masihi. We are followers of Yeshua. We are followers of our Lord. In my Knesset, my church, we all come together. We provide food for everybody every week. Not just a sandwich. They're frozen chickens, little rice, lentils, sugar, everything for the week. We have a brilliant clinic. We do dentistry, medicine, laboratory, drug therapy. Everything is free. We even have one of the best stem cell therapy centers in the world, all taken from the patient's own blood. not from aborted fetuses or anything unethical. And my young people, getting back to what they said Abuna, has the world forgotten us? Has the world forgotten that we are there? They are our people. Yes, we can talk about being Christian, but do we know we're brothers and sisters? You might be here in DC, I might be there in Baghdad, but we are one. We are together. We are together the children of God. I know what it's like to be an Abuna, a priest, a father in Baghdad. An Abuna means my father. And that is what I am to my people. And I can honestly say that it is the biggest honor in the world to be a priest in Iraq. I used to say to my people, I'm never going to leave you. Don't you leave me. They have. We used to have 1.5 million Christians. We now maybe have 200,000. Half of them have gone to Kurdistan in the north. I am here in America this week to get the award that Congressman Wuerl got not long ago, the Wilberforce Award. But I have, and you gave it to me. Thank you. But I also was in Chicago, because I teach at Wheaton College. But my people live in Chicago. My people. There are more of our Christians in Chicago than there are in Iraq. My congregation isn't small. It's thousands. But so many have gone. All the time they leave. And I confess, I cry. Because my loved ones are leaving. And I used to say, I'm not leaving you, don't you leave me. I can't say that anymore. Because I know if my loved ones stay, they might be killed. I know that if my loved ones remain, the chance of them surviving is very little. I have been shot at, I have been kidnapped, I have been thrown into rooms with chopped off fingers and toes. I have had my church blown up and destroyed. I have had my clinic destroyed. And yet, we always come back. We always build it again immediately. Can I just say one thing? We as Christians in Iraq feel forgotten. We feel that we have been left. We feel alone. But the problem is not just Christians. Whether you're Mandiyah, Yazidi, Shia, Sunni, you are attacked. My biggest supporters are my Muslim colleagues, my ayatollahs, my senior imams. Not all of them are bad. The bad people in Iraq are probably 2%. They're causing the destruction of everything. My assistant is a Muslim. She's a dentist in the clinic, and in the afternoon she's my assistant. She makes teeth and peace. But sometimes I get worried that she's doing too much peacemaking, not enough teeth making. And so we do not want to be set against the other, because that's very dangerous for us. So I come here today, I say we feel forgotten. Our biggest problem is we feel forgotten by the church. Our biggest problem is not that the Grand Ayatollah has left us. He hasn't. He's still with us. Our biggest problem is that the church is not with us. Some are, and we thank you for that. We thank you that you have not forgotten us. We thank you that you do support us. And in my church and my clinic, which is the biggest clinic in Baghdad, we work with all of the religious leaders. Masihi, Islami, Yazidi, Mahdi, and we are one. We are together. So take heart. Our problem is not there in Iraq. Our problem is here in America. Will you pray for us? And we come and lay this before the Almighty. We lay this before God. Our faith is very simple. Voice of the Martyrs came to visit us, and they said, all around you is destruction. Everything is being blown up. All is terrible, but this is the happiest place we have ever seen. Ah, said one of my adopted daughters. She said, when you've lost everything, Yeshua is all you have left. He is with us. He will not leave us. And we come and we ask God's blessing upon our work. Sheme Baba, Rona, Brocha, Kosha, Ha'alaha. Amen.
Congressman Wolf, Congresswoman Eshel, and my brothers and sisters in the household of God. I am Metropolitan Methodius of Boston. One of the fundamental teachings of Christianity, as we all know, according to the book of Genesis, is that God created humanity in His image. Ancient witnesses have interpreted this to suggest that human beings possess qualities that reflect God's very presence. This is especially true with regard to human freedom. Freedom is that which distinguishes humanity from the rest of created order. And because of our freedom, our actions represent far more than a primitive urge to survive. Because of freedom, we rejoice when our brothers and sisters succeed, and empathize with and care for them when they suffer. Today we have come together, clergy and laity, men and women, Orthodox, Roman Catholic, and Protestant Christians, to exercise our freedom and bear witness to the plight of Christians living in the Middle East, the land of Christianity's birthplace. For 2 millennia, Christians in this region have professed love for and lived in peaceful coexistence with their neighbors, regardless of faith, ethnicity, or race. We cannot turn our backs and ignore the current situation. We must deplore the wanton destruction of Christian churches, monasteries, convents, orphanages, and hospitals throughout the Middle East, and all unspeakable acts of terror. We are all members of one family bound by our commitment to Jesus Christ, and as such, when one member suffers, the entire family suffers. While the majority of speakers will focus their attention particularly on Iraq, Syria, and Egypt, please permit me to discuss the condition of those members of our Christian family in Turkey who have endured a similar fate, living as they do in a country where they constantly struggle for basic human rights, equality, religious freedom, safety, and security. The issue of Christians in Turkey is relevant to our conversation today, precisely because the Christian experience in Iraq, Syria, and Egypt has been the experience of Christians in Turkey for almost a full century. Indeed, since the establishment of the Republic of Turkey in 1923. Let us consider and reflect upon a few facts. When the Ottoman Empire entered World War I in late 1914, its Christian population numbered 4.5 million. This included Armenian as well as Greek and Assyrian Christians. By 1923, however, that number had fallen to 250,000. This was the direct result of the genocide of Christians in Asia Minor. As late as the mid-1950s, there were still over 100,000 Greek Orthodox living in Turkey. Today, however, out of Turkey's total population of 79 million, Christians amount to a tiny fraction, a little over 0.1%, and there are only 1,700, perhaps 2,000 Greek Orthodox among them. It is a painful fact that in the short 90-year history of the Turkish Republic, Christianity is nearing extinction. The plight of the ecumenical patriarchate and the Greek Orthodox community of Turkey is iconic for all Christians in Turkey, and tragically for our brothers and sisters in Egypt, Iraq, and Syria. There, a massive pattern of persecution and oppression is directed against all Christians who are experiencing nothing less than a human rights disaster of epic proportions. In Turkey, we Greek Orthodox have suffered and continue to suffer interference in the free governance of our church. We are not free to train our clergy because the theological school of Chalki, which served as the main training ground for Orthodox Christians in the region and represented a center of ecumenical engagement between Christianity and other faith traditions, remains closed by the government of Turkey for more than 43 years. Christians suffer economic disenfranchisement as our personal and communal properties have been confiscated and destroyed by the state. We have experienced the conversion of our churches into mosques, such as the Church of Hagia Sophia in Nicaea, the Church of Hagia Sophia in Trabzon, and threats now by the Turkish Prime Minister and his government to convert the great Cathedral of Hagia Sophia in Istanbul, one of Christianity's most glorious places of worship and a world treasure precious to all faiths, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, into a mosque. These measures have caused great pain and sadness for all Christians in Turkey and throughout the world, and have led the ecumenical patriarch Bartholomew, the spiritual leader of 300 million Orthodox Christians, to express again and again his hope for love, peace, and freedom to prevail for all peoples in the region, peoples of every faith and tradition, believers and unbelievers, for all human beings. We are called to reflect the love and mercy of Jesus Christ and to speak the truth in love. We cannot remain observers to the injustices occurring in our ancient homelands, nor ignore the violence and anarchy endured by our brothers as we have in the recent past. Living here in freedom, we cannot be indifferent to the plight of the two Orthodox Archbishops, Paul and John, kidnapped in Aleppo, Syria over a year ago and still missing. If we wish to pledge our solidarity with our brethren in Iraq, Syria, and Egypt, then we must insist that the leaders of these countries meet their responsibilities to treat all their citizens equally before the law and to guarantee their safety and security. Until such time as there is peace in the region, may we remain prayerfully vigilant, and exercising our freedom, may we give voice to the souls of those who have been slain because of the Word of God and the testimony they have maintained. And permit me to end with something that I think we all see. Every time we go to an airport or to a bus station or a train station, we see signs all over the place saying, if you see something, say something. Well, we have seen a lot. The time has come to begin saying something.
I want to thank Representative Wolf and Representative Eschew for highlighting this tragedy. We at NRB salute you, and I'm pleased to join in this call to action. In particular, NRB is urging final passage of your Near East and South Central Asia religious freedom legislation in the Senate. I appreciate what my friend said about Turkey. I visited there a couple of years ago in Antioch, which after Jerusalem was the center of early Christianity. Chrysostom started out there. I went to, I think, the only evangelical church in Antioch, about 40 believers. They had been harassed, threatened, beaten, terrorized, particularly by the story of the 3 Christians who had their throats slit in a Christian publishing house by 5 radical Muslim men who resented the fact that they had converted from Islam to Christianity. Now, I represent the media, and so I brought something for you to see and to hear, because we've heard the statistics and the large numbers. And I think it's important to remember this is about people, individuals. And this is a story that was on Egypt Today, a mainstream newscast. And a Muslim, a moderate Muslim commentator set this up. And we'll watch just about 30 seconds of it and hear it. This is a man who's converted. From Islam to Christianity. And he's about to have his head cut off. That's not something we want to see in this assembly. But what does that man say? He's saying that this man is an apostate. He's saying that this man, because he believes in the Trinity, is a polytheist. And then he shouts Allah Akbar 2 or 3 times. And the man takes that knife. And it takes 2 minutes. I watched the video before I came here to prepare for this meeting. It takes 2 minutes for that man's head to be sliced off. He picks up the head and sits it on the back of the decapitated corpse and celebrates the victory. He holds it up into the air. Then you go back to the commentator on Egypt Today, and to his credit, this moderate Muslim commentator says, "Is this Islam? What does this have to do with Islam?" And he is scolding, condemning this execution. And I'm here to say, as media, and particularly Christian media, we must tell these stories. We must speak out and speak up. Some don't agree with this approach. But when racists in the South were lynching black Americans, we saw and we heard songs about strange fruit, and it made a difference. When Emmett Till was brutally beaten, his mother insisted on an open casket because the pictures make a difference. When the Nazis were committing genocide in Germany, General Eisenhower insisted on bringing in the cameras and showing those newsreels in American theaters because the pictures make a difference. And I'm saying to you, when someone who grows up in any religious tradition hears that Jesus was a great teacher, a great miracle worker, and the Son of God, and that He died for their sins on the cross, and He rose again, and they believe in Him, and they love Him, and they trust Him, they should not have their head cut off. They should not be stoned. Their houses and their churches should not be burned. And when they are, we must speak up and tell these stories. And if a moderate Muslim broadcaster can tell that story, American media can tell that story, and certainly Christian media must tell these stories. And so I want to say that the NRB Board of Directors this year, representing 100 key Christian evangelical media ministries, unanimously passed a resolution in February urging the President and the Secretary of State to actively advocate to the international community the principles of the First Amendment and to urge the adoption of similar standards in the rest of the world. I will not be silent in face of this persecution, and we call on our fellow Christian leaders across the United States to take their stand against it as well. Thank you.
I want to talk a little bit about the pledge itself. This has been a collaborative project. We've had many churches, many voices, many individuals from across the United States and from the region have a say in it and have their views considered. And I want to thank Leith Anderson for her work in pulling this all together. Over 200 religious leaders have signed the pledge so far, and we invite others to take this up, post it in their churches, on their websites, in their communities. The pledge belongs to all the signers. There is no letterhead, no one organization that owns it. It's going to be on our website at Hudson Institute. I think Frank Wolf is going to post it, and others as well here today. But it really is remarkable how Christians from all faith traditions and from many faith traditions across the partisan divides have come together, really in a display of Christian unity that has been too rarely seen since maybe 325 of the Council of Nicaea. So it is remarkable. Now, why these three countries? There's definitely trouble throughout the region in many countries, and Christians have been leaving the region for a long time. But this is what is happening in Egypt, Iraq, and Syria today is different. Christians are being targeted for their faith. And the Christians in these countries, well, Christians are the largest religious community that is not Muslim in the region. And the great majority of these Christians live in these three countries. So that if they are driven out, the entire Christian presence in the Middle East is at risk of eradication. This is in the land of its birth. So it is our fervent hope, all the signers of the pledge, including myself, that This is the beginning of a concerted effort of, on the part of American Christians and other people of goodwill to engage with prayer, with education, and in foreign policy. This is on behalf of the Christians of these three countries, but it's also on behalf of the other small religious communities, the Ahmadis, the Mandeans, the Yazidis, the Baha'is, and so forth. We hope, and for moderate Muslims who are also targeted by extremism. We hope that this pledge will help shining the spotlight on this human rights crisis will help spiritually, morally, diplomatically, and economically. Thank you.
I had the privilege several months ago of entertaining for some days in New York and throughout the Northeast the Bishop of Syria. And it's, as I was discussing with His Eminence Cardinal Wuerl just a short period of time ago, it's the little things that sort of matter. We took the bishop around and met with Cardinal Dolan. Bishop Mansour was with us, also from Brooklyn, with us on this during these days. The bishop was with us. But at the end, I said to him, "What can we do to help you?" And he said, "I need a cheese-making machine." Because many of his flock have escaped to the mountains and are living in the mountains and have their goats with them, and winter was coming, and they needed a cheese-making machine, which we were able to provide. Although I mentioned this to His Eminence Cardinal Dolan of New York, he said to me, "Well, you know, I was a bishop out in Wisconsin." He said, "We know a lot about cheese out there. What can I do to help you get a machine?" So that sort of took on a life of its own. But it's these stories that we try to promote as the aid of the Church in Need, to let you know, let the nation know, the American people know how people are suffering. And again, it's these little stories. So recent events in the lands where Christianity was born reveal an increasingly violent campaign of persecution against Christians, one that has provoked an unprecedented exodus of Christians who seek no special recognition, but wish only to live in peace under the rule of law that ensures them the same rights and privileges of all citizens. Aid to the Church in Need USA, a papal agency, calls on all world governments to protect Christianity's patrimony and its presence in the Middle East, to recognize and support the Church as a critical resource in helping to rebuild communities in conflict, and to enable local Christian communities to be of service to all citizens regardless of faith. Hence, we're very pleased to sign on today's pledge. Thank you very much.
I think there's a remarkable study in contrast at work here today, and I think we all should really recognize it. We're gathering here today in Washington, free and safe, and meanwhile in Egypt, Syria, and Iraq, Eastern Christians, these Christians in the land where Christianity was born and spread, are experiencing a massive human rights crisis and a humanitarian catastrophe. Canon Andrew White eloquently pointed out, I think, the ugly existential problems of Christians in the region also signal problems faced by other small religious communities and more generally by majority communities in the region. And I think that's worth taking in mind. Our gathering here and the pledge to stand in solidarity is a critical step, I think, in not looking away. And that's been a theme that's been raised repeatedly. And I think it's something we really need to take to heart. We can't look away. We need to turn our attention to the condition of these Christian communities whose at-risk status has long been overlooked. We don't want the attention to be too little, too late. And I think it's the responsibility of all of us in this room to cooperate as we pledge to pray, to educate, and to work tirelessly to ensure that Christians do not disappear, that they're not erased, both their physical, their living presence, but also any other emblems of their presence, their churches, their monasteries, their schools, that they are not erased so that a process of memoricide is not conducted in the region. Now, without repeating what our distinguished speakers have already said, I do think it's important to emphasize comments by both Congresswoman Eshoo, Archbishop Choloyan, and also Metropolitan Methodius. Today's events for Christians in Egypt, Syria, and Iraq do recall the genocide against Christians, Armenians, Assyrians, Greeks in Asia Minor, and what Christians in Turkey quite honestly have been experiencing for the last 90 years. I think the experience of Orthodox Christians on the ecumenical patriarchate in Turkey and in Turkish-occupied Cyprus, that experience is a powerful, painful, and quite shameful example of what happens when the world and when American Christians look away, remain indifferent, or dissemble. The tiny size of the Greek Orthodox Christian community in Turkey today, the ecumenical patriarchy, 1,700 to 2,000 souls, it's large when you compare it to the size of the Christian community that remains in Turkish-occupied Cyprus. There are less than 400 Greek Orthodox Christians left in Turkish-occupied Cyprus. Armenian and Maronite Christians, there are no longer any in Turkish-occupied Cyprus. So again, I think this is an example of what happens when the world looks away. Why should anyone care? I think we should care, obviously, because we all are committed to the protection of universal human rights, including the right of religious freedom. So the condition of Christians in their countries of origin and how we respond to that condition is a bellwether. It'll tell a story about how we respond to violations of the rights of believers and unbelievers from majority and minority traditions and confessions throughout the region. So putting it quite simply, how we respond, I think, will send a message to how we as the gathering of Christians, but also as free American citizens, respond to the plight of those who are imperiled, whose rights are violated. Again, believer and unbeliever, large size, small size communities around the world. For Christians, this is literally a matter of survival. So there's an urgency, I think, that we all need to take quite seriously. But again, how we respond will really tell us about whether or not we truly believe that our neighbor is more than the person who lives next door to us. Our neighbor is more than someone who sits next to us, and whether or not we look in the mirror and see in our face the face of our neighbor. That's the challenge for us here today. Thank you.
Dr. Moore was supposed to be here today. He wanted to be here today, but he was too ill to take the flight in. He wanted me to express his regrets for that, but my guess is everybody else who was going to be on that plane is probably grateful he didn't get on the plane. He does regret that he was not able to be here with me today. I'm glad that I'm able to stand here instead and add my voice of concern and alarm for my brothers and sisters and people of other faith as well in the Middle East today. I want to thank Representative Eshu and also Representative Wolf for your leadership on this. And quite frankly, I don't know what we're going to do when Congressman Wolf is no longer active in his role as Congressman Wolf. My guess is, my prayer is he will always be engaged, however. I'd love to see him as the next ambassador for religious freedom over at the State Department. Well, I'm pleased to be able to stand here with these great men and women of faith and leaders of the communities of faith, draw attention to what is happening to brothers and sisters in Christ, members of other small faith groups as well. The persecution that is occurring seems to be occurring at a wholesale level at this point in these lands. Stories of rape, robbery, dispossession, brutality, and murder coming out of this region on a daily basis are truly disturbing at the very least. The video Dr. Johnson just showed us should break every heart. Consider that that is happening today anywhere in this world. We can no longer sit by while our brothers and sisters in Christ and other peace-loving people of faith are subjected to such barbarism. I don't know what else to call it except sheer barbarism. There was a time when there were at least 600,000 Chaldean Christians in Baghdad alone. We heard the impassioned statement earlier about what's happening in Iraq and Baghdad. Today there are less than 400,000 in the entire country of Iraq. And from what I'm hearing, that statistic is old. Right now. In the statement, and I hope you will all read this, and we are going to make sure that we distribute it broadly to our 46,000 Southern Baptist congregations in this country. The words of Patriarch Sacco of Baghdad are preserved. And he said, last December, we feel forgotten and isolated. We sometimes wonder if they'd kill us all, what would be the reaction of Christians in the West? Amen. Would they do something then? Well, my friends, I submit it will be too late then. The United States government, the faith community, and all people of peace should begin immediately to run to the defense of these special people who choose not to retaliate against their attackers. Their response of grace reminds me of the suffering of Jesus himself when he willingly took the abuse of his captors and did not strike back. These embattled communities are looking to us for their rescue. They're the people Jesus mentioned in Matthew 25. We will be held accountable one day for the way we responded to them in their hour of need. May the Lord declare us faithful and fitting recipients of the glory to come, because we did not shrink back from this need, but reached out to these men, women, and children created in his image, for whom Christ himself also died. It's my hope and prayer that today will be known as the day their relief began. We must join together in prayer, advocacy, acts of mercy and grace from this day and onward until Christian, Jew, Muslim, Hindu, Buddhist, faithful and faithless live together in the Middle East in peaceful harmony. We can and should do no less. Thank you.
My name is Johnny Moore. I'm the Senior Vice President of Liberty University. And I'm going to speak impersonally for just a moment, and then I'm going to speak personally. I know that typically in a room like this one on a subject of such significance, a guy like me, 30 years old, would be behind the scenes somewhere, not at the microphone. But this is a multi-generational issue. We live in a young world. 50% of the world is under 25 years old. And 85% of that 50% lives in a country where severe religious persecution isn't an occasional occurrence. It's something that they live with every single day. If they fit in a certain group, they fear going to school, they fear professing their faith, they fear even praying silently in their bed at night that they might be the next victim. And we need to live in a different world. And these countries in particular that we're talking about today, they're all countries with populations where 50% of their population is under 25. Those disproportionately affected by this tragedy are young people. They're in their 20s, both victims and perpetrators. And as perhaps a representative of young evangelicals, young Christians for that matter, in this country and around the world, as the sole spokesperson for us here this morning, I would say that, respectfully, perhaps we failed in telling the story to the next generation. And that's where this becomes personal for me. I have no connection to this part of the world. I was born in America. I was educated in America. We go back generations in America. But I took a trip one time to the first of many, dozens and dozens of countries and dozens of trips. But I went to Rwanda And I went in some obscure church that hardly anyone had ever heard of, and in the basement of the church there were caskets, and the caskets were filled with bones. And it was a tiny little church, and I had never seen anything like it before, and I automatically started weeping. And I walked out, and there was a little guest book outside of that church, and I didn't know what to put on that guest book, but I put "never again."
Sure.
Never again. And not too long ago, earlier this year, I was, by happenstance, in a meeting that was convened on the subject in Jordan by the perhaps greatest advocates for Christian concern in the Middle East, the royal family in Jordan. And I was sitting there listening to story after story I had never heard before. And I wept again, and I wondered why we still have to be saying these things in the modern world. Paul, if we tell our children the story of his conversion, we talk about him being on the road to Damascus, to Syria, Homs and Aleppo, these cities that many Americans hadn't heard of until very recently, are cities that are known for their Christian populations that are almost entirely decimated. These are stories that need to be told again. I think it's interesting that when we continue to ignore the terror that we are capable of inflicting upon one another, then we will be victims of our own story again and again and again. And we have to raise our voices, because when the best of religion is targeted, we are robbed of the world's collective conscience, and eventually the only thing left is terror. And then we all become victims. And so I don't lead an organization that has in our mission statement advocacy for Middle Eastern Christianity. But as a Christian, these are stories that I intend on telling. And I join with the voices here today in celebrating the heroism of Congressman Wolf and Congresswoman Eshu, who have fought this gallantly. And I feel even fearful speaking about this at all in the presence of the people that are here in this room. But I want you to know you have the voice of the next generation, if it's only my voice. And it's not the end of anything, it's the beginning of it. And we shall pray, and we shall work, and maybe our children's children will live in a world where religion is talked about not in the context of tragedy, but in our best hope.
Good afternoon. Assalamu alaikum. Peace be with you. Shalom. Assalamu alaikum. First of all, we would like to thank Congressman Wolf and Congresswoman Eshu for making this event happen. We are very grateful to you. Thank you again. This is our Father in Aramaic, the language that Jesus Christ spoke, as Reverend Ken said it so eloquently. We appreciate that. Thank you for your support, by the way. You're doing a great job in Iraq. We appreciate that a lot. Please allow me to read a message from his Beatitude, Patriarch Sacral of the Chaldean Church. Dear sisters and brothers, the challenges that Iraqi Christians are facing are very strong. The migration is the big one. It is based generally on poor security in the country and religious extremism. Migration of our community is worrying us. Before the collapse of the old regime, we were about 1,500,000 people. Now we are around half or even less than that. And the situation continues along this course. Our numbers in the coming 10 years will not be more than a few thousands. What we need are your effort to help us to stay home. in our ancestral land and churches. You should try to improve security in Iraq and also work harder to influence the Iraqi future government to consider Christians as equal citizens with the same rights and duties. I believe the only solution for Iraq is to establish a standard of citizenship for all Iraqis that go beyond religious, sectarian, and ethnic affiliation. Please tell Western countries not to encourage migration of Christians from Iraq and other countries in the Middle East. On the contrary, their presence can help bring about peaceful coexistence among all of the citizens of these countries. We value your solidarity, closeness, and positive impact on yours and our communities, and God bless you always. Luis Rafael Sacco, Chaldean Catholic Patriarch of Babylon, Baghdad, May 3rd, 2014. As you see from this message of his beatitude, that our people in Iraq are in trouble. Our church is in crisis and in disaster, as his beatitude said. So we really need your help and support in making sure that to save Christianity in the land of cradle. Iraq is the land where Prophet Abraham, our forefather, was born, in Ur of the Chaldea. And our Christians in Iraq were over 7 million people before the advent of Islam. Now there are less than 500,000. So you can see that there is a problem, and we really need your help and support in not having the Christianity go in demise in Iraq and in the surrounding countries. I'm sure you all heard the slogan by the extremists in Iraq stating that yesterday was Saturday and today is Sunday, referring to the Sabbath days of Christianity and Sabbath day of Judaism. This is really very important to learn that they don't want us to be there. Is it all of them who don't want us there? No, that's not the reality. No, a lot of them that do like us, they understand us, as Reverend said, but those who are the extremists are causing the trouble and really pushing our people out of their ancestral land. So we need your help. What we need from you is that if you can help in urging President Obama in his assertion that he can help in the plight of the minorities, not only in Iraq but in the Middle East. He pledged that during the National Prayer Breakfast. He pledged that also during his meeting with Pope Francis. We need to make sure that will become a reality. Dear all, let us together save Christianity in the land of the cradle. Please do not leave us alone. It is a moral responsibility to all. Your support is greatly appreciated. Thank you very much.
I want to thank all the speakers for being here, and I know people have airplanes to catch, and so we will end. But I want to thank the speakers, all of you. I want to thank all of the signers. Anna and I will put this in the congressional record and give as much. We thank all of the media that has come. Some of the speakers have to leave. Others will be here for the media to ask questions. But I just wish that, and I don't know if this has been filmed, who filmed it, but I wish every member of Congress, House and Senate, Republican and Democrat, could have seen, and hopefully eventually they will see and will hear. With that, thank you all very, very much.